Victorian T-shirt
that says
which fits him
cough.
better. So
It says copycats. It's like copycats.
No, it says ambitious.
Because they want to be the same. Because they want to be the same.
Drew's has changed 3 times, I think.
I was never said that.
You were Slytherin the first time you took it, and then you were a Hufflepuff.
Well, I was not.
No. Okay.
Then you were. Y'all just joking on me because I didn't like Harry Potter.
Oh no, I don't know. I know, for real, right? In this house especially. Do y'all know that? Well, some of you know, but I throw a birthday party for Harry every year on July 31st. It's a big party.
So close to that.
Is
I
it?
just throw a Harry Potter
July
birthday
7th.
party.
Whose birthday is July 7th? That's Cole's birthday.
My birthday is July 3rd.
Yeah, if you have something to turn it in up here, right?
My birthday is February 17th.
I didn't realize Darcy and Cole had the same birthday. That's cool. Yeah, so every year on July 31st, I throw a party for Harry, and it's usually an all-day event, and we do crafts, and we have Harry Potter food, and we do Harry Potter games, and we watch the movies, and it goes all day. I've had as many as like 120 people come through. It's like an open house. You just kind of come when you want and leave when you want.
Do you have a Harry Potter map? Do you have
Of all of them, probably 3. The third one.
My second favorite movie's 3, and my first favorite's 5. I just love that fire dragon.
Oh yeah. What were you saying, Lois?
Do you have the Harry Potter match game?
Match game.
It's called
Like,
Top
it's
Trump
not-
Match Game.
I don't think I have that one.
It's like where you match fate. It's like where you match characters and. You
Oh, that's
have to-
cool.
And it's basically like.
I got Harry Potter Lookup for Christmas.
I did too. I got the book.
Oh
I got the potions class. It's actually Cole got it for me.
I got the potions book on my birthday, and I got the huge castle.
Oh, I'm jealous.
It had Professor.
Yeah, I got this for Christmas from my kid. Isn't that hilarious that I got a Lego? I love it.
I only have Lab 17.
Oh, we should have
Yes, I'm here.
19 somewhere. Be sure you turn in. Couple things for you guys. Let's see. Armstrong people. Lewis, you have the biggest backpack, I think. That's your stuff from the party, like your dish. Yeah, turn it in, sure your name's on it. And I'm gonna pass these 2 cards around. I just want y'all to sign your names. We had, it's just your report card. You've already seen it because it came digitally. Anyway, if you guys would sign your names to this and pass it back up to me, we had 2 people who donated supplies for our class for Christmas gifts, just for being sweet. So we want to just sign a thank you for them and pass that around. Sign your name to both of them. Ooh, wireless headphones are great.
Already
I have the. We did solo.
Who's next? Sky. Anthony. Okay.
And Lily.
And Lily is not gonna be here. She's she's in Arizona. What, Drew? Twisted, I believe. Isn't it? There you go. Sorry, I sent you a confusing pen. All right, so everybody had a nice break.
Yes.
And last week was weird because we were all kind of online and scattered, but I think it was the right thing to do. Yeah.
Still on break.
Yeah, because it's still Christmas. Yeah. I think it was a good call last week. I think you know, I was talking to somebody this morning, and I think over the last month, I've been knowingly exposed like 4 times, but every time I knew about it, it was after the CDC, there's 2 of them, make sure you get both, right?
Yeah.
After the CDC's recommended quarantine period before I even knew. So that's what happens these days. And the reason is because, so this new variant, this Omicron variant, yeah, this new variant of COVID, apparently it starts in your throat and then it migrates up into your sinuses and your upper respiratory, but it doesn't really settle in your lungs like the first one did. And the Delta, those were the ones that were causing like all the ventilator issues and stuff. So, but because it settles in your throat first, the nose swabs that everybody's doing don't catch it as early. So a lot of people are passing it really quickly because we don't know we have it. And so they're trying to get FDA approval or something for home kits with throat swabs in them. So maybe we can catch it earlier, but it doesn't seem to be quite as dangerous, at least as far as putting people on ventilators and
Yeah,
stuff
it's
goes.
basically like the common cold.
It's getting that way. And so, like I said, I sent y'all an article a couple weeks back about it, and I found some new articles I've been adding to that thread. And I'm going to create an extra credit assignment for you guys to form some hypotheses about this variant, because it's interesting to see where this one might go. This one's different than the last two, so it might go a different way. And I'd be curious to see what your hypotheses are based on your research.
My friends from my Girl Scout troop,
Mhm.
they had it in March of 2020, and then they got it over Christmas. And in March, they said it wasn't very bad.
Right.
Over Christmas, they all got it. They were vaccinated and they already had it.
Right.
They got it again, and it was
Thank you,
even
friend.
worse than the first one.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
They were dying, is what they said.
It's a bizarre little bug, but we're figuring it out. All right, so we're starting a whole new unit now, and we're going into protists and fungi, and we're going to talk about basically now we're going to move from the simplest organisms to the most complex organisms. And what's probably the most complex organism on the planet?
Humans.
Yeah, very good. So we're going to start with these little single cell things, and we're going to move through sort of the evolutionary span of complexity. And as we do that, we'll see things get obviously more and more complex, but we'll get closer and closer to organisms that are more like humans. And that'll be the last thing we do. Our fourth quarter is pretty much all human anatomy, and it'll be really fun. But this is the quarter, this third quarter here is when we're going to be doing a lot of dissections. So I want you to keep that in mind, because there are some of you that may not be comfortable with dissections. And if that's the case, there are alternate assignments for every one of those labs. Okay, so let's get rolling here. Protists and fungi. All right, so this was the homework, right, from our lesson 19, and we'll go over this together. Yeah, so let's see what we've done here. Does anybody know what number 1 was pointing to?
Philly? No, not
That's pointing to this plasmid DNA. Remember, the DNA that's in a circular form is called a plasmid, right? And how about number 2, pointing right here? What's this? Oh, this stuff. Well, yep, you got it. Those are chromosomes. And yes, Miss Darcy.
I do not have lab. I do not have lab.
Yeah,
I don't
she
have
never
anything
put in
past
her
that.
unit 3.
Oh, you didn't put in your stuff. Oh, so did you complete 18 at home? It was the one to do, watch the video and then complete the other form. No, it was did you turn it in today?
Yeah.
Okay, then you're good. Don't worry about it then.
I don't have anything past.
Oh, you don't have anything past that? Oh, I thought you guys took your stuff with you you took your packets with you. Yeah, you did. You took them with you, because I don't have them. So it must probably be at home.
I put it in here.
It's okay. It's all right. How about number 3? What's number 3 pointing to? Can I tell? Number 3?
Number 3 was
Middle. What's this stuff in the middle?
Those was the
That's going to be the cytoplasm. It's not pointing to the little ribosomes yet. Okay, now what do you call these things?
Philly.
Close. Billy. And how about this one? Number 5.
endospores.
Good job. And how about number 6 right here?
That was the where was it?
Cell wall. Okay. So this guy here is a virus, and it's a particular type of virus. Does anybody know what this type of virus is called when they look like little space modules? Do you know? What is it? Bacteriophage. Good. And what do they infect? Do you remember? They infect bacteria, right? So we use these a lot in research because they aren't going to infect humans, but they do infect bacteria. So what do we call this thing at the top?
The head.
Head. And what's in it? You can see it there. Good. And what do we call that part?
The collar.
Very good. And how about this part?
The sheath.
Sheath. Very good. And how about 11?
That was base plate.
All right. And
Then tail fibers.
you guys are good. All right. So let's start with protists now. What's a protist? All right. Now this is a protist. There are some loosely used terms in here. And also you'll find that like in the next week or two, when we start to move into plants, you'll find that some of these things that are categorized as protists, some people also categorize them as plants. And there's a little crossover depending on how certain scientists prefer their taxonomy to go, right? Like they'll put them in a different category based on what they think. So we're going to kind of show you how they can go into both. So protists were the first eukaryote. So do you remember what a eukaryote is? I'm a eukaryote. You're a eukaryote.
Multicellular.
Not always multicellular because protists are single-celled, but a eukaryote has not a prokaryote, a eukaryote.
Oh,
Nuclear bound membrane, membrane bound nucleus. So any single celled or multicellular organisms whose cells contain a distinct membrane bound nucleus. Now I say multicellular because you're going to find that there are some really interesting protists that do contain a nucleus, but they sort of like their cell walls sort of go away and become like a big mass with a bunch of different nuclei. It's sort of like cells that are all squashed together and they're no longer really separate. And those are interesting. So a protist is any unicellular eukaryotic organism that's not an animal, plant, or fungus. And then there are going to be those little weird ones off to the side that can be multicellular, but they're not traditionally multicellular. They're not different cells separated by membranes. So it's not a plant, an animal, or a fungus. And we say that because, again, like I said, some of them are going to be crossovers. They're going to want to say they're plants, but they're not really plants. All right, all protists live in moist places. And this is because they have to absorb water into their bodies from their environment. They don't have a way of taking it in, like roots on a plant or a mouth on a mammal, right? So most are unicellular and then some are multicellular, some, not very common. Some can move and some cannot. Now we're going to be looking at protists today that are modal. These guys have a means for locomotion. In lab, we're going to be watching some that actually move around, and it's pretty cool. While it's likely that protists share a common ancestor, the exclusion of other eukaryotes means that protists do not form a natural group or a clade. So they probably evolved from something similar. We're thinking probably like a virus, because a virus is like the most ancient and primitive type of, I don't want to say organism because it's a thing that has some DNA, right? That has some genetic material in it. And remember last week when we talked about prions and cannibalism? That was hard to forget, right? I mean, that was interesting. So
I watched that video. So.
Isn't that wild? That's really wild. So yeah, so these guys probably evolved from things like that. But they don't necessarily make a nice straight evolutionary line from there. So they're a very diverse group. We lump a lot of things in with protists. So here's a cute little protist. Isn't he cute? So many species are more closely related to plants, animals, or fungi. So they kind of, sometimes they lump them like that. Plant-like ones, fungi-like ones. And you can say fungi, you can say fungi, you can say fungi. This is one of those words that gets pronounced. I'm a fungi, yeah. Why does the mushroom get so many dates? Because he's a fungi, right? All right, so let's look here. We have those that are similar to plants, those that are similar to animals, and those that are similar to fungi. All right, so let's have a look here at what's similar to plants and why. So green algae are the closest relatives to land plants. Now we're talking about protists and I'm saying green algae. When we talk about plants, I'm going to talk about green algae again, as if it were a plant, because this is the one that crosses over where people are like, sometimes we'll see it as a protist and sometimes we'll see it as a plant. It just sort of depends on what scientist is preferring to do what. So evidence shows they evolved into land plants. So if it evolved into land plants, then some people say maybe it was an early plant, right? 475 million years ago, and some biologists include them in the plant kingdom, which is what I said. Green algae are split into two groups, okay? We have chlorophytes and charophytes. Both groups contain single-celled and multicellular algae. Okay, when you see algae that looks like seaweed and it's strung together, that's actually algae. Those are actually multicellular protists or plants, depending on how you're going to look at it, that are all strung together. So charophytes are most closely related organisms to land plants, and they're found in freshwater environments. Chlorophytes are found in marine, freshwater, and land-based ecosystems, but mostly found in shallow freshwater. So you have to think about salt, right? Like if you're trying to get moisture into your body, you're going to have to watch your salt gradient. Remember way back when we talked about cells that would lyse if they had too much salt in them or too little salt in them. We got to keep that osmotic balance going. Oh yeah, slugs. People do it to slugs and snails. So these guys, the similar to animals, are protozoa, and this is what we're going to be looking at today in lab. Okay, so protozoa is sort of an informal term, and it is for a group of single-celled eukaryotes that are either free-living or some are parasitic that feed on organic matter, such as other microorganisms or organic tissue and debris. Whereas these guys are photosynthetic, which is why some people lump them as plants. These guys actually eat stuff. They're sort of like detritivores, like the oldest detritivores, sorry, the guys that eat organic debris and matter, right? So historically, protozoans were regarded as one-celled animals. We used to say that because they often possess animal-like behaviors such as motility, predation, lack of a cell wall, and as found in many plants and algae. So algae over here and plants obviously have cell walls. These guys don't have cell walls. They do have a cell membrane, but they can move and they do exhibit certain behavior. So you can see why they're saying they're animal-like, right? So historically, they were divided into 4 major groups: the amoeba, the flagellates, the ciliates, and the sporozoa. And we have examples of a bunch of these. Now, this word amoeba, just so you know, there is very often an O here between the M and the E, and that's fine too. It's just 2 acceptable spelling. So I typically use the O because that's how I've always done it. I'm seeing this one more and more. I don't know why. Sort of like color and color. If you're British, you throw a U in there. So did your mother put a U in color? Yeah, I figured she did. You do you too? Yeah. Uh-huh.
And whenever we were in kindergarten writing color, they were like,
This is
wrong.
so wrong.
They were like, wrong.
You're like, sorry, no, it's right. All right, so they're fungus-like protists. Okay, and these are molds. All right, so when you hear about molds growing on things, that's what we're talking about. So they are absorptive feeders on decaying matter. They resemble fungi and they reproduce with spores, which is the same way fungi reproduce. So in other ways, they're quite different from fungi, more like other protists. For example, they have cell walls made of cellulose. So what are plant cell walls made of? Do you remember? Plant cell walls are made of cellulose. So are these guys over here, the plant-like protists. They're made of cellulose, chlorophytes, charophytes. But these guys, they have cell walls made of something called chitin. Chitin is what the cell walls of fungus is made of. It's a different compound than cellulose. So chitin is different. So that's why these guys are a little more fungus-like. And then like other protists, they have complicated life cycles with both asexual and sexual reproduction, and they're motile in some stages. So you can see how we might assume that, you know, maybe plant evolution branched from here and animal branched from here and fungus from here.
Kind of sounds like a bit German.
Chitin, yeah. So the 2 major types of fungus-like protists are what we call slime molds. That's awesome, isn't it? And water molds. I'll tell you where you can see a slime mold pretty frequently. If you don't clean a toilet in this part of the world, this part of the country, a very common slime mold can grow in there that's pink. Have you ever seen pink mold in a toilet?
Yeah.
You have? Yeah. If you've ever seen pink mold in his toilet, if you've ever seen pink mold in a toilet, sometimes it's gas station toilets or whatever, but it's pretty common around here. And it's a pink slime mold. And that's an example of a fungus-like protist.
We for our Girl Scout troop, we were cleaning up around the church, and we saw a slime mold on the ground, but we weren't actually sure if it was a slime mold because it was white and fluffy.
Oh.
And we tried to identify it with steak, but it just said sorry.
I've seen this.
So we all assumed it was a slime mold.
I've seen this gelatinous looking thing. It's like,
oh yeah, it's cool. I've seen those too outside. So we've got a couple different protists, and I'm gonna play these so you can see, because this is what we're looking for today in our lab. So we have animal-like protists and how they move. Paramecium have these cilia. They're like little, if you ever seen a crew team where you've got the guys in the boat with the oars and there's a bunch of them, that's exactly what these are like, a ton of little oars, all right? And then amoebas have these pseudopods, They can move their outside of their cell wall around, and a pseudopod, you know what pseudo means? It's like or sort of like is what it means, similar to, and then pod is foot. So they're like feet, if that makes sense. Like feet, because they can kind of move around. And then the flagellum right here, this is a word you can also hear, like if you ever hear the word flagellate with and whipping someone, like someone can be flagellated. It's a old punishment, right? So that's what that is. It's like a little whip on the end that they move around with. All right, so most protists are modal, but different types of protists have evolved varied modes of movement. The euglena have one or more flagella, which they rotate or whip. There's some euglena moving. See them? And you'll see that today in lab. The paramecium are covered with rows of tiny cilia that they beat to swim through liquids. So there they are. And you'll be seeing some of them too, hopefully. The amoebas are going to be hardest to see. So amoeba form cytoplasmic extensions called pseudopodia anywhere on the cell and anchor the pseudopodia to the surface. So what you're looking at in the middle is the big thing moving. That's the amoeba moving. The other little things around it are some other protists that are in the way.
Yeah, get out of the way, protists.
So some protists can move toward or away from a stimulus, which we refer to ataxis, right? This is taxis. Protists accomplish phototaxis by moving toward light and by coupling their locomotion strategy with a light sensing organ.
They look like tadpoles.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So plant-like protists are autotrophic because they have chlorophyll, so they undergo what process? If you're autotrophic, huh? You have chlorophyll. How do you make food? Yeah, photosynthesis. Right? Protists have protists that perform photosynthesis, that's a hard sentence, are autotrophic. The position of photosynthetic protists at the base of the food chain makes much of the diversity of aquatic life possible. They feed fish, whales, support coral reef, and provide shelter to marine life. In areas where sewage is dumped, they recycle waste. And however, when the amount of waste is excessive, algae can grow into enormous algae blooms, which is a terrible thing. So what is the most important protist on Earth?
They hope you have a plankton fun watching. Right now, there are incredible creatures in the ocean with the power to reshape the planet's atmosphere. After all, they've done it before, and you've probably never even seen them unless you've looked at seawater under a microscope. I'm talking, of course, about phytoplankton, the microscopic critters that almost all life in the oceans and arguably on land depends on. Phytoplankton is a catch-all category for all the tiny aquatic organisms that can turn sunlight into food via photosynthesis. And there are all kinds of different organisms included in it, from cyanobacteria to whip-tailed dinoflagellates to armored diatoms, which look amazing under a microscope, by the way. Diatoms are essentially algae that build little houses out of glass or silica, to be precise, and they come in a stunning diversity of
diatoms.
forms. In fact, if you've ever spread diatomaceous earth around your garden or your house, you were sprinkling fossilized diatoms. There are also coccolithophores, which can look kind of like a soccer ball covered in frisbees, thanks to their teeny tiny shells made of calcium carbonate. In fact, England's famous White Cliffs of Dover contain the fossilized remains of countless coccolithophores. And in today's ocean, the smelly compounds they produce help give the sea its unmistakable scent, a smell birds like albatrosses use to find their meals. The compounds that make those smells can also travel up high into the atmosphere to help clouds form and grow, making them more reflective and helping to keep us down here a lot cooler. And dinoflagellates are also very cool, don't want to leave them out. They have two tail-like flagella that help them swim around, and many can produce their own light, which makes for some really magical effects. But too many of them in one place can create a harmful algal bloom, a phenomenon you might have heard referred to as red tide, which is just one example of how these super teeny creatures can have a big impact on the rest of us, even us landlubbers. No matter what form phytoplankton take, they are unbelievably important to all life on Earth. First off, they're the foundation of the marine food web, underpinning everything from anchovies to whales. In fact, with a wee bit of help from seaweed and aquatic plants, they manage to support life in the ocean despite being outweighed by roughly 5-to-1 by organisms that don't make their own food. And if that's not enough, they are also atmosphere-altering machines. They consume about as much carbon dioxide as all of the world's forests and other plants combined, pulling roughly 11 gigatons of carbon from our atmosphere every year, which is especially impressive when you consider that by mass, there's about 450 times as much plant life on land. Plus, phytoplankton account for more than half of the planet's yearly oxygen production. But even more importantly, they're kind of the reason we have oxygen in the atmosphere at all. Back about 2.5 billion years ago, near the boundary between the Archean and the Proterozoic eons, the Earth was a very different place. There were green seas and orange skies, and the atmosphere was likely a mix of gases like ammonia and methane that would immediately kill us. Then cyanobacteria evolved and ran rampant, pumping out a huge amount of oxygen in what's now called the Great Oxidation Event. All that oxygen helped turn the ocean and skies blue and likely jump-started the evolution of complex life. And then around 540 million years ago, phytoplankton did it again, exploding in numbers and bringing us up to more or less the levels of oxygen in the atmosphere we have today. Paleontologists think the boom may have occurred thanks to nutrients weathered out of rocks by giant continent-sized glaciers. Or a more recent idea is that it happened because the plankton evolved a more efficient internal machinery related to photosynthesis. Either way, this set the stage for life to fully spread throughout the ocean and onto the land. Since then, they've calmed down on the reshaping the entire planet front and adopted more of a stabilizing role. For example, paleontologists think the evolution of calcifying plankton balanced ocean chemistry and helped protect the seas from mass extinctions. Before about 80 million years ago, the ocean was not a super stable place to be. Changes in the chemistry of the atmosphere from events like volcanic eruptions often caused deadly swings in seawater pH. Then some lineages of plankton, including those ball-like coccolithophores, figured out how to make shells of calcium carbonate. Soon, they took over the open ocean. And over a relatively short period of time, so many of their shells sank to the depths of the oceans that they created a vast, thick layer of calcium carbonate ooze on the seafloor. That ooze acts as a chemical buffer in the ocean, a natural braking system on runaway acidity. See, the shells are solid at a more neutral pH, but as the water gets more acidic, they start to dissolve, releasing carbonate ions. Those chemically react with the surrounding seawater to push an acidic pH back towards neutral. Now, there had been a minor version of this in the shallows, thanks to mollusks and other large-shelled organisms, but it took phytoplankton to make it ocean-wide. And the end result was a more stable ocean chemistry, which meant marine life became less vulnerable to things like volcanic eruptions. Even today, this chalk layer is helping buffer the acidifying effects of all the carbon dioxide that we humans are pumping into the atmosphere, though there's only so much it can do. When we consider everything that lives in the ocean, from majestic whales to bountiful coral reefs, these little unassuming phytoplankton are easy to overlook. But if you look at the history of Earth, it doesn't take long to realize that though they are small, they are also mighty, and they deserve as much fascination, love, and protection as any other living thing on this planet. Thank you again to the Monterey Bay Aquarium for partnering with us on this episode of SciShow. The aquarium's mission is to inspire conservation of the ocean, so give them a follow.
So did you catch what percentage of the Earth's oxygen comes from phytoplankton?
60%.
About 50, 60, 50, 55, 60, somewhere in there. So when people, a couple years ago, the rainforests were all on fire. It was pretty terrible. That's awful. We don't need the rainforest to be on fire. It's not a good thing. But people were freaking out because people were saying things like the Earth's lungs are burning. Like, we're not going to have any oxygen. The Earth's lungs are burning. This is awful. But that's not accurate. The rainforest is not the Earth's lungs. The oceans are, because it's full of these phytoplankton. So these are the guys that provide most of the oxygen for every organism on the planet that requires them. Correct. But these are the guys that are putting it out. And so that's how it gets in there, a lot of it. So, you know, there are some, I have to find, there's a really good documentary. I'll have to find it, but there's actually, because of the way the ocean currents flow and the way the winds flow, there's actually almost like a river of oxygenated air that flows in a particular pattern above the oceans. So it's really, really interesting. So fungus-like protists, slime molds and water molds. Can a slime mold solve a maze? Yeah, actually they can. So these guys obtain their energy by decomposing organic materials, and as a result are important for recycling nutrients, all right? They can be brightly colored and live in cool, moist, dark habitats. They're classified as either plasmodial or cellular by their modes of reproduction. The plasmodial slime molds form a structure called a plasmodium, a mass of cytoplasm that contains many nuclei, but has no cell walls or membranes to separate individual cells. So remember just a little bit ago when I was saying sometimes they're multicellular, but it's not traditionally multicellular. This is what we're talking about. They mush all together and they maintain their individual nuclei, but they lose their cell walls and they sort of become this giant mass. The cellular slime molds exist as individual cells during the feeding stage. And these can move like amoeba as well, engulfing food along the way. So when amoeba eat, they've got these pseudopods, right? And they actually will take their pseudopods and they'll put like one here and one there, and they'll engulf something that they want to eat. And then they'll make this, put it inside of a bubble, and then they'll dissolve that membrane that surrounds the bubble. And then they've got the food inside them. It's pretty cool. So yeah, they can actually solve mazes, which is sort of fascinating.
Very simple.
Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Wow, some engineers don't
Richard
have brains,
Hammond.
everybody.
I just saw something that said Richard Hammond, though.
Oh yeah.
I don't think it was very similar. Richard
A
Hammond
lot of
said
it was.
Richard
So how do protists reproduce? All right, so protists reproduce by a variety of mechanisms. We've got asexual reproduction. And that means basically that whatever is being produced, the daughter cells are genetic clones, okay? So most protists undergo some form of asexual reproduction, such as binary fission, to produce two daughter cells. This is an example of binary fission. A cell would start like this, it would stretch out, it would start to get this shape and kind of pinch off in the middle, and then it would pinch off entirely. And very much like our mitosis, right? That is binary fission. Then we have some protists, like true slime molds, exhibit multiple fission and simultaneously divide into many daughter cells. That's all kind of at once. Some undergo budding, producing tiny buds that go on to divide and grow into the size of the parental protist. So you've got a big protist with this little bud on the side, and then it grows and pops off. And actually yeast do that, if you've ever watched yeast under a microscope. Fungus-like protists were once classified as fungi because they produce sporangia. A sporangium is a structure that produces and contains spores for sexual reproduction. So spores are, pollen is more like a male sex cell. So it's half the genetic material, right? It's haploid, but sporangium are diploid. And they just sort of fall to the ground or fall to wherever, in this case, some liquid or moist environment. And then they just grow into a new organism. And then there are some that reproduce sexually. And in those cases, this involves meiosis and fertilization, and it's common among protists, and many protist species can switch from asexual to sexual reproduction when necessary. So they can do one or the other, and that would be based on usually environmental conditions. And then lastly, we have conjugation, and it's a specific type of sexual reproduction that occurs mainly only in ciliates. So those are like paramecium with the little oars on the side, right? And it's a process where the nuclei form gametes and then come together and they fuse and they form what they call a zygotic nucleus. Then it makes a new offspring that way. So what are fungi?
So pretty.
I love this. This is beautiful. It's like a bouquet of gorgeous mushrooms from the bottom, right? Now, remember, when you're seeing a mushroom, the part of the fungus you're seeing is actually just the reproductive organs. Most of the fungus is underground, sort of like an iceberg, where most of it is under the water. It's the mycelium under the ground that make up most of the fungus. So fungi are eukaryotic, heterotrophs, so they get their energy not through photosynthesis, but through absorbing typically nutrients, that have cell walls. And the cell walls of fungi contain chitin, which is a carbohydrate.
So an iceberg could be like this big.
Yeah,
on top,
huge.
And then from there,
Yep.
there on the bottom, and then to the Titanic.
That's exactly right. So they cannot make their own food. They have a nucleus and a cell wall composed of chitin. They grow in warm, moist places. You ever hear somebody say, they treat me like a mushroom? They keep me in the dark and feed me poop? Yeah. If you're somebody who feels like you're left out of a situation or nobody's telling you what's going on, sometimes people use that phrase. And that's because they do grow, when they do mushroom farms, they use a lot of manure and stuff to grow them on. So most fungi can be unicellular or multicellular, obviously, like yeasts are unicellular, right? And then you've got multicellular ones like these guys here. So most fungi are composed of thin filaments called hyphae. So the fruiting body of a fungus, such as the above ground part of a mushroom, is the reproductive structure you can see. It grows from many hyphae that are tangled underground, and they form a mass called a mycelium. So the hyphae are these they're like little fibers, little hairs almost, kind of like roots, but way smaller. And they go everywhere under the ground. And together we call that a mycelium. And they ooze chemicals that break down food, and they absorb stuff too. So most of them reproduce asexually and sexually. Asexual reproduction can occur when cells or hyphae break off and begin to grow on their own. And some of them also reproduce sexually by means of spores. Now, if you have mushrooms at home, like if you've got some white button mushrooms or portobellas hanging around or whatever, baby bellas, a fun project is just take a piece of white paper. All right, take the stem off the mushroom so you have just the cap and turn it upside down and sit it on the paper and just leave it there for a day or two. If you look under here, this part of the mushroom, all this stuff that looks all like fluffy or whatever, those are called the gills. And that's where the spores are located. So if you turn that mushroom upside down and leave it and come back a day or two later and lift it, you will see where the spores have fallen out, and it will make a print, like a little black, almost like a stamp of the underside of the mushroom. It's really pretty.
Just don't touch, just be careful around white ones because those can kill you.
Yeah, we have all kinds of strange ones that grow in nature. Lewis, you're so mean. He's trying to blind her. So does anybody know what a fairy ring is?
Yes.
Okay, so very often if you see mushrooms growing in the wild, you'll see them growing in a fairy ring, which is a circle of mushrooms or an arch, part of a circle, if not a complete circle. And that's because the way the mycelium function, when they're underground, the hyphae are trying to find other hyphae. And very often they will connect to other parts of that network, and it just forms a circle. And then above ground, you have all these little toadstools. And the idea, because they pop up overnight, they grow really fast. So the idea is people would say, oh, well, look, there was a fairy meeting here last night because all these little stools around the fairies had a little circle and they all sat on their little stools. So sometimes, yeah. So they call them fairy rings. But if you ever see one, that's because there's this network underground that's connecting them all. So here's your diagram of a mushroom. You got scales, your cap, your gills. This is the part that makes the beautiful print if you want to give that a try. This ring skirt, stem, sometimes called a stipe. Vulva is this big thing at the bottom, and then these mycelial threads. So this is super interesting. Mushrooms, mycelium and mushrooms and fungus in the forest do crazy stuff.
Oh. And then the trees ground.
Yeah.
The idea of talking trees has been capturing the human imagination for generations. Okay, so maybe they don't talk to us, but it turns out trees can talk to each other. Speaking to each other. But that does beg the question, what do trees have to talk about? And can you learn to speak their language? Underneath the soil, a vat.
Hello.
A connected network of life links the trees through their root systems. But they can't talk to each other without help. The whole process starts with hub trees, the oldest and tallest trees in the forest. Hub trees have greater access to sunlight, and through the process of photosynthesis, end up producing more sugar than they actually need. underground, fungi need sugar to survive. Most of their bodies are made up of a mass of threads called mycelium. They grow within the root system of trees to absorb the excess sugar. In return, the mycelium provides the tree with the nutrients it needs from the soil. This symbiotic relationship is known as mycorrhiza, which stems from the Greek words for fungus and root. These tree-fungi relationships connect the trees in the forests together, forming an underground communication network to exchange water and nutrients, nurture their seedlings, and even send warning signals when under.
Termites.
So, how many trees are really talking to each other? To get a better picture of these forest relationships, a team of researchers used DNA analysis to map a fungal network in a Canadian forest. Remarkably, they found that one tree was connected to 47 other trees. Their models also showed that when hub trees were removed, it would cause more connections to be lost than if trees were removed randomly. Studying these kinds of underground exchanges will play a vital role in creating stronger, more resilient forests for the future. So even though we might not be able to talk to trees, at least we can still keep trying to understand their language. Who knows what they might say?
So fungus, mycelium, actually provides a telecommunication network for trees, which is pretty amazing. So this is one of the last things I've got for you. Some fungus species are bioluminescent. And we do have some in this area that are bioluminescent, and they're sort of an orangey color.
When I went camping at Shady Grove in October, there was this, we were camping on a peninsula.
Yeah.
And there was this cove. So we went down there, and the first thing we saw was a big neon yellow mushroom.
Oh, wow.
And when we brought down a black light, it glowed.
These actually light up without black light. They're pretty cool. Trying to figure that out. So, Anthony, so you came a little late. Can you sign these 2 thank you cards for me, please? I'm bring them back over. These are for people who gave us some Christmas gifts, some lab supplies for Christmas gifts. All right, so what we need to do is get out your lab for today. If you have anything to turn in, be sure it's in a folder. And then we're gonna head over to lab, and you're gonna join your new teams today. I want to say bye. You can draw yours on a separate sheet of paper. Do you have a blank paper? If not, I have some over here.
At the back of your binder, you have the.
You should have some, yeah.
I just turned it over and I found a picture. Just use that picture.
Yeah, as long as you've got some paper. I've got some blank paper here if you need some, Darcy. I'll put it right there. Because you're going to be basically diagramming what you see today, and it's not for turning in. All right, I'm going to end. Bye.